Perfect. Well, hello. Thank you guys thank you to the host for inviting me to kick this thing off. My name is Mitchell Ryan Diston. I just successfully completed my PhD at the Universidad de Valencia, and I'm currently looking for postdocs. So if you hear of any, please send me an email or something. So yeah, I will very briefly try to distill a few hundred pages of my interdisciplinary doctoral thesis and hopeful manuscript into this talk titled Evolution in Space and Time, the second synthesis between evolutionary biology, ecology, and the philosophy of biology. So let's get to it. The crux of evolution, the main ontological thing that we are researching is change. Evolution is about biological change over time. It is a surprising fact that for the majority of evolutionary research, we have rarely studied how evolution typically unfolds in nature in changing ecological environments over space and time. This is the big ambitious claim of my research, which I originally modeled off of the founder of ecological genetics, E.B. Ford here, who noted how rarely we studied evolutionary dynamics in the wild, something I don't think we truly accomplished until the last 40 years. And then for some historical and philosophical background, biological methodology was originally fashioned after physics in the early 20th century because that's just how everybody thought we should do science. Before our first major synthesis in biology, known as the modern synthesis, biology was largely seen as a second science. There were many competing theories of adaptation, not just natural selection, but also orthogenetic theory and Lamarckism. And all the subdisciplines of biology, such as paleontology, genetics, and physiology, were largely divided. However, after the modern synthesis, evolutionary biology and biology in general became seen as respectable scientific disciplines. There was a universal acceptance of natural selection as a primary theory of adaptation, and biological knowledge became integrated into a coherent theoretical framework, with evolutionary theory lying at the epicenter of biology. So what caused all these significant changes during this era? Well, there are many reasons, but primarily the adoption of a robust mathematical program that quantified evolution, otherwise known as population genetics, lent evolutionary biology a new legitimacy within the broader intellectual zeitgeist of logical positivism. All three of the founders of population genetics, such as R.A. Fisher, Sewell Wright, and J.B.S. Haldane, were attempting to bring biology on par with the physical sciences and drew explicit exemplars from these exact and rigorous sciences. And this is how the population geneticists modeled evolutionary change, using a statistical model at a population level with the four causal forces of selection, mutation, migration, and drift acting on individuals within a population to cause evolutionary change within mostly constant environments. But this is not how evolution unfolds in our capricious ecological environments, despite many instructors still teaching this model to the next generation. Thus, I think we have undergone something of an empirical revolution over the past 40 years, in part spurred by the synthesis between ecology and evolutionary biology, but also moving towards greater empirical realism, as we call it in the philosophy of science, in our laboratory experiments. You see, historians and biologists are quick to note the relative disconnect between ecology and evolutionary biology, exemplified in this quote by Massimo Pigliucci here, where he states the common claim that modern synthesis basically ignored ecology. And while there is a kernel of truth that for the majority of their institutional histories, ecology and evolutionary biology have developed somewhat independently of one another. For example, ecologists and evolutionary biologists typically publish in different journals, attend different conferences, and divide interdepartmentally. But I find the history to be so much more nuanced than what most authors imply. In the rare occasions where ecology and evolutionary biology have dated, dramatic theoretical progress has been the result. And this is the key takeaway message here. While ecology did not play a major role in the early development of evolutionary theory through the vehicle of population genetics, it did play a much larger role in the overall acceptance of the population genetic viewpoint of evolution during the modern synthesis. Early evolutionary ecologists such as Dobzhansky or E.B. Ford corroborated the population genetic viewpoint of evolution with their fieldwork, but they rarely used their fieldwork to drive new theoretical conclusions. Thus, evolutionary ecology truthfully did not begin to inform evolutionary thinking and theory until about the 1980s, which is when we begin to see an explosion of field studies of natural selection, largely due to the methodological advances spurred by establishing a quantitative standard to study natural selection dynamics in the wild, known as the Landian-Arnold framework. After the 1980s, we begin to finally understand how evolutionary dynamics play out over longer timescales and frequent spatial changes. And since then, I think an entirely different and novel picture of evolution has come to the fore. Hence why I see recent developments in evolutionary biology and ecology as another whole-scale biological synthesis, because its underlying causes and consequences are similar to that seen in the first synthesis, the modern synthesis. Before the second synthesis, we generally thought of evolution as a slow and gradual process. Natural selection dynamics as they play out in the complex space and time of nature were still relatively unknown. And the causal models or theories we constructed to explain evolution and natural selection were therefore largely abstract and reductive because they had little empirical input from ecology. Now, following the subtle and organic synthesis between ecology and evolutionary biology over the past 40 years, we now know that evolution can proceed at faster rates and thus on similar timescales to ecology. We have seen an exponential increase in our knowledge of natural selection dynamics, expounded in all the recent reviews of field studies over the past 20 years, which we have progressed past the asking of, is natural selection operating in natural populations, to asking the deeper question of how is natural selection operating, or what is the nature of natural selection. Those first generation models illuminated how selection varies in strength and direction. Second generation elucidated how selection and fitness varies spatial temporally. And as a result of the second generation, we are beginning to understand how evolution plays out over longer timescales and frequent spatial changes, thus revealing long-term evolutionary phenomena such as multi-level selection or evolvability that were once hidden in the purview of a reductive evolutionary biology. Which brings me to the last point here in red, which is more prescriptive than descriptive. Without question, we have recently experienced a massive increase in our knowledge of evolutionary and selective dynamics due to the second synthesis. Whenever we see such a massive increase in our epistemic reservoirs in the sciences, we should meet such progress with theoretical reflection. I therefore think we are existing in an intermediate stage of scientific progress that warrants turning all the new knowledge revealed by the second synthesis into useful and predictive theory. This is where the philosophy of biology can be of great use, inventing new theoretical and explanatory strategies to accommodate all the new knowledge. In an area of evolutionary research that has been profoundly impacted by ecological insight is the evolution of sex. Sex is still widely regarded as one of the major unexplained phenomena in evolutionary biology, often referred to as the queen of problems in evolutionary biology. So why is sex a paradox? Well, because sex is well known as an emergent and population level adaptation that is also extremely costly to the individual. It takes time and energy to find a mate. Individuals only leave 50% of their alleles to offspring. And there's a significant evolutionary detriment to having the number of reproductively viable individuals within a species, otherwise known as the cost of males. So why do we sex then, given all the individual costs? Well, sex does one thing in particular, and we have actually known this since August Weismann in the late 19th century. The genetic mixing seen in meiotic recombination is known to accelerate and facilitate species adaptation to novel ecological environments, especially over longer timescales and frequent spatial changes, thereby ensuring their long-term survival. However, what is less recognized today is that the exact same explanatory issues are propping up in the adaptive mutation literature, and for much the same reasons as sex. Beginning in the 1970s and 80s, researchers began observing increased mutation rates when they placed bacterial populations under stress. This began to erode the fanciful modern synthetic notion that all mutations are random, and began to imply that selection may actually increase mutation rates when a population is stressed, despite deleterious effects to individuals within the population. The evolutionary biology community has undergone something of a bifurcation in models on mutational dynamics over the past 20 years, with the non-adaptive models of mutation, such as Drake's model or Lynch's drift barrier hypothesis, struggling to maintain the past reductive theoretical tenets of natural selection, seeing natural selection as only a force that decreases mutation rates to conserve individual offspring viability. However, a new model has slowly and subtly been building in the literature, known as the adaptive models of mutation. It argues that natural selection can act to increase mutation rates, thereby increasing the probability of fixating an advantageous genetic variant and facilitating adaptation when a population is stressed or in a novel environment. And so I cannot go into great detail on all the evidence that now underpins the paradox of sex, but just note that a lot of this research stems from ecological studies, and these studies found that sex increases the probability of species survival and evolutionary rescue in the long term. The same thing goes here for adaptive mutation. Adaptive mutation tends to enhance a natural population's ability to survive in the long term. And these results align with the overall picture emerging out of evolutionary ecology today. In this study published recently in Science, the researchers performed a meta-analysis of 19 long-term studies performed in the wild and found a 2 to 4 times larger additive genetic variance in relative fitness, implying that genetic adaptation is a much more significant causal factor in the rescue of species than we previously thought. Most natural populations harbor an extensive amount of genetic variation. And why is this variation there? It doesn't benefit individuals, at least not in the short term. It doesn't benefit selfish genes. It primarily benefits populations and species, higher levels of biological organization. Thus, what I believe what most biologists have failed to understand, even about their own research findings, is that they're observing natural selection, even if they don't originally see the results that way. As rightly recognized here by G.C. Williams, we as a discipline have been, historically speaking, so infatuated with how natural selection causes adaptive evolutionary change. We have completely forgotten to ask, what is natural selection as a causal theory in ecological terms? You see, natural selection can act as a cause of evolution without actually causing evolutionary change. All we need to say that some biological trait or feature is an adaptation under maintenance selection is that it suffices these two necessary and sufficient causal conditions, originally drawn from Lewontin's famous principles. If a trait is heritable and said the heritable trait is causally connected to the survival of a biological entity at any level of biological organization, then this is all that we need to say that a trait is strongly conserved by maintenance selection. And this is unsurprisingly the primary causal mechanism underlying a lot of adaptive genetic variation mechanisms, and why we have persistently failed to explain their existence and persistence over time. That's one of the big ideas that is emerging out of the second synthesis from ecology, but also from long-term experimental work, is that adaptive genetic variation mechanisms are emergent adaptations that benefit higher level entities, strongly maintained in most environmental contexts, precisely because they facilitate adaptation to novel environmental circumstances. And I won't go into a significant amount of detail here about this recent chapter that I wrote for the Dickens and Dickens book, and that attacks the EES and other progressive movements. But while we have a significant amount of evolutionary biologists who still operate in the old, outdated, statistical, and largely reductive viewpoint of evolution that was produced without empirical input from ecology, we also have another camp of biologists who neglect the causal import of genetic evolvability. Most in the evolvability research front view evolvability in evo-devo terms as a developmental phenomenon. But evolvability is so much more significant explanatorily and causally as a genetic phenomenon. And this is how we should conceptualize evolvability, as a higher level fitness determinant, meaning that natural selection not only selects for higher fitness peaks, but also for the ability to traverse and explore the adaptive landscape in the complex space and time of most natural ecological environments. And with that, here are the major takeaways from my doctoral thesis. Number one, that over the past 40 years, biology has undergone another major synthesis between ecology and evolutionary biology. Number two, due to the second synthesis, new emergent phenomena such as multi-level selection and or evolvability are finally being revealed. And number three, we need new explanatory strategies to explain most of these phenomena from the philosophy of biology. And last but certainly not least, evolution is an ecological phenomenon, not a statistical one. We purely do not have the statistical methods to match the natural complexity of biology. We cannot model the causally complexity of most biological systems and relationships using the mathematical strategies we have at our disposal today, because the biological world is merely too messy and too weird to do so. So yes, that is my end. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mitchell. And if it's okay with you, I'll leave it to you to call in folks for questions. I see.
Yeah, sounds good. I don't see everybody.
You don't see everybody?
Yeah, I just see Joanna Mazel, and that's the only person I see with a hand raised.
It's me too. So
okay,
yeah,
perfect. Yeah, so Joanna, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, we have to ask her to unmute.
Yes, if you can unmute.
Okay, so beautiful talk. Thank you very much.
You.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep, perfect.
Excellent. So the question is, the one part I'm not following is, why is the framework incapable? I mean, as you admitted that there's, all of these genetic causes of evolvability that have huge explanatory power, and I agree. And they use the same kind of mathematics, just applied to a different problem. So, and I don't know what exactly you mean by reductive, but if they are reductive by reducing it to a formal mathematical theory, they're sort of in the same tradition as before in that sense, even if they're not in the same tradition in terms of which question they ask. So yeah, I'm convinced by everything you said, except this anti-reductive, could you elaborate on why you think you need to go that far?
Yeah, of course. No, so I think at least in the last 5 years most people in the evolvability research front, I know that we had a big conference a few years back, and I know that most researchers deny the relationship between selection and evolvability, precisely because they are looking at it from an evo-devo perspective, and they're not looking at it as a genetic phenomenon. And I think that there's also, some social stigma of thinking of evolvability as a higher level adaptation. So I think there are a lot of researchers and a lot of good literature, at least over the last 20, 30 years, who have thought of evolvability in this way, but a lot of the primary in the evolvability research front, they do not like to see evolvability as a primary, a higher level adaptation. And this is one issue that I believe that we really need to focus on more, is because sex has always been the best example of what evolvability is. And I think sex has also been another great example of higher level adaptations.
So Mitchell, I'll encourage you to continue that discussion via chat. We'll
sounds good.
Sorry to cut you off. We'll move on to the next speaker now. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you.
And so, Jeff, I believe you're next. There you go.
Thanks. Thanks, Alex. I think I'm sharing my slides now. Good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Wild. I'm from the Department of Mathematics at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, Canada. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape-Wuk, and the Chinooktun peoples. I want to talk today about some recent work that I carried out in collaboration with my colleagues here in the biology department. Our work aims to uncover an adaptive purpose, and maybe Mitchell in a statistical sense. So maybe you and I'll have some fun chats, maybe in a breakout room, for fairness when different kinds of individuals are in the same population. Sorry, folks, I'm just, I think I've got the, advance my slides. Okay. So we were motivated by two basic observations. The first observation is that the pro-social preference for fairness shown by humans and certain non-human primates seems puzzling. And puzzling in the same way that cooperative traits are often called puzzling. Why, for example, would an individual engaged in a struggle for life, as Darwin put it, be okay with taking a fair share of some resource? Why not more than one's fair share? The second observation was that an individual's status has been found to influence its preference for fairness. So sex, gender, and even socioeconomic status, for example, can impact the degree to which an individual expresses fairness. So these two observations together led us to ask, how can we understand status-based preferences for fairness theoretically? Now, we're certainly not the first set of investigators to ask this kind of question. In fact, answers to the question have been offered by many in the evolutionary psychology community, and they tend to implicate reputation management as a driver of fairness. With our work, what we wanted to see was what kind of answers could we discover when we look at the problem through an evolutionary, more specifically a kin selection lens. So more on that in a minute. To answer our question, what we did is we built a mathematical model centered on the ultimatum game. So if you haven't encountered the ultimatum game, it's an evolutionary game that involves two players. The first player, shown in blue on the far left, is called the proposer. The second player, shown in purple, is called the responder. The proposer and the responder are tasked with splitting a resource. In the cartoon, the resource is $4 green, as shown. You can see that on the far left. The proposer makes a proposal as to how the resource might be divided. So in the cartoon, for example, the proposer is suggesting that they receive $3 and that the responder receive only $1. If the responder accepts the proposal, then the resource is divided accordingly and players go on their way. However, the responder may reject the proposal. And as the word ultimatum suggests, if the proposal is rejected, then both players receive nothing. The extra bits that feature in our version of the ultimatum game are highlighted at the bottom of the slide. Players in our version of the game may, in some cases, be kin, and by this I mean that they are more genetically similar to one another than they are to an average member of the population. In other cases we consider, players are non-kin, and by this I mean that they are less genetically similar to one another than they are to an average member of the population. We also assume, and this is shown at the very bottom of the slide, that proposers are predictably individuals of one status or type, and that responders are predictably individuals of a different type. So for example, proposers might always be large, high status individuals, whereas responders might always be small, low status individuals. The details here aren't important, but what is important is that we assume players reliably differ with respect to their evolutionary value to their lineage. In more technical terms, I mean they're differing with respect to their reproductive value. We allow players in our model to use two basic strategies, rational and fair. When in the role of a proposer, a rational strategist will offer to give only a small fraction of the resource to its partner. When in the role of responder, a rational strategist will accept any non-zero offer it receives. We're calling this strategy rational because it's the one that ought to be employed by a rational player, a player who thinks more is better for me when they are proposer, and a player who thinks something is better than nothing when responder. In contrast, a fair strategist will always offer a 50-50 split and accepts nothing less than a 50% share of the resource. We're going to assume that each strategy corresponds to one allele from a two-allele PopGen model. And the details that we add to this model are minimal. We're thinking of something that's haploid and asexual. We have the rational allele, say allele A, a fair allele, allele B. In a sense, though, the rational allele is really a null allele. Or we can think of rationality, or we're going to assume that rationality is a default state. This last point is important for understanding the three versions of the PopGen model that we explore. So the first, shown at the bottom of the slide, is that we assume that the fair allele is expressed only by proposers. In other words, any responders carrying the fair allele will act in a rational manner. We'll flip it around in the second version, and we assume that the fair allele is expressed only by responders. So in this case, proposers will act rationally. And in the third case, we combine the two. So any and all who carry the fair allele will express the allele. The predictions or the results that I'd like to share with you, they're just going to kind of scratch the surface of what we found. And they will be summarized using a figure like you see here. I want to show how predictions vary with changing relatedness between players, and I've put that on the vertical axis of this figure. And I want to understand how predictions will change with changing reproductive value, and that's indicated on the horizontal axis. And with the dashed lines, I'm carving up the space into 4 basic quadrants corresponding to different levels of relatedness and reproductive value. So for example, in the top right quadrant, you see we're talking about model scenarios in which a proposer tends to be more valuable to its lineage than a responder, and kin or relatives tend to partner up, genetic relatives, sorry, that is to say, tend to partner up to play the game. Here's a summary of the results for our first scenario. Remember, in this scenario, the fair allele is expressed only by proposers. Fairness is favored by selection where we see gray shading, so in the top left quadrant. Rationality is favored everywhere else. We see that when the fair allele is expressed only by proposers, fairness can be only favored if responders are more valuable to their lineage than proposers, and if kin tend to interact. We interpret fairness in this case as a mechanism that allows members of a genetic lineage to direct resources to their more valuable relatives. In a sense, we're looking at fairness as an altruistic act directed to towards high value relatives. Here's what we get in the second case. So fairness here is expressed only by responders. The gray shaded region where fairness is favored has now moved to the bottom right quadrant. In the bottom right, we have non-kin interacting with each other. So individuals who are less related to one another than they are to the average member of the population. And proposers are more valuable to their lineage than responders. The location of the gray prompts us to interpret fairness as a mechanism that allows individuals to keep resources out of the hands of competitors of their more valuable relatives. So in a sense, we're casting fairness as a spiteful act. An individual is incurring a cost, losing its chance to get a share of the resource to harm a competitor of its relative. In the third case, where we have everyone who carries the allele expressing the allele, we get predictions that, in a sense, combine the two predictions we've already encountered. We've got gray in the top left, covering those situations in which close kin tend to interact and responders are more valuable. We have gray in the bottom right, covering those situations in which non-kin interact and proposers are more valuable. Our interpretation here combines the ones I've already shared. We're interpreting fairness as being either altruistic or spiteful. So just to wrap up in the last minute that I have with you, I'll reiterate that we've used a model for the evolution of fairness that has emphasized evolutionarily significant differences between individuals. We're arguing that fairness can be adaptive because it sends resources to those parts of the lineage where they can be best used, and because it can protect valuable parts of a lineage by keeping resources out of the hands of competitors. The maintenance of fairness is often understood in evolutionary psychology as an outcome of strong reciprocity. And by strong reciprocity, I mean that fairness is maintained because fair or cooperative individuals are rewarded, whereas unfair or uncooperative individuals are punished. The interpretation that we offer is based on kin selection theory and can be seen as an alternative to strong reciprocity ideas from evolutionary psychology. Because we're not, our interpretations don't preclude the existence of reward or punishment systems, it's also reasonable to treat what we're saying as a supplement to previous work. In other words, we're pointing to advantages other than or in addition to those connected with strong reciprocity and reputation management. So with that, I will just thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to my co-authors. If you're interested in our work, there's the DOI, and it's not living behind a paywall. So thanks again.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. And again, if you're able to see the people with hands raised, I'll let you call on them.
I am, I think. Okay, I see Michael.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Are you suggesting that this mechanism might be one way to initiate fairness behaviors? Because reciprocity is dependent on that system already existing, whereas this might be a method which would initiate that system.
I would agree that we are initiating fairness. We're considering the origin of fairness on a background of rational behavior. So yes, I think my answer to your question, if I'm being not too cheeky, is yes. Well, it seems like they bought it, Alex. They all bought it.
It did. So what are the next sort of in terms of model extensions? What are the sort of next steps out of this?
That's a great question. I hadn't really thought about that. This was kind of coming from a graduate student project.
Sure. Yeah.
I think Michael has an interesting suggestion about thinking about what happens after this fairness gets off the ground and how maybe it might, connect with reciprocity, strong or otherwise.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks. I'll stop sharing.
Sounds good. And we're right on time, even a minute early. So Erhard.
Yes, I try to share.
Yes.
So, can you see my slides?
We can, thank you. You're good to go.
Okay. I'm ready to start. Is it okay?
Yep, absolutely. Please do.
Hello, my name is Erhard Glötzl. I'm coming from Austria. And in this talk, I want to give you the answer to the question, why did our world develop just like this and not differently? Charles Darwin has already explained much of this, namely how and why the different species have evolved from single-celled organisms to animals and finally to humans. But he was not able to explain everything. Why, for example, did the technologies hearing, speaking, writing, printing, and computer technology develop in this order? Why did the economy evolve from a barter economy to an economy based on the division of labor, and further on to a market economy with money and investment? Why has money evolved from commodity money to coin money to paper money and to electronic money? Why could animals imitate and humans learn and teach? Why and when did the different cooperation mechanisms develop? Group cooperation, direct cooperation, debt cooperation, indirect cooperation, cooperation via norms. But more importantly, why has everything been evolving faster and faster? And where's the journey of evolution heading for in the future? Are we heading for a singular point? An answer to this is given by the general evolutionary theory of everything, which explains the evolution from the origin of life to the market economy. This I would like to describe briefly in this talk. The general theory is a comprehensive extension of Darwin's theory. The basic idea is not only to consider, as Darwin did, the evolution from the perspective of genetic information, but instead to consider the evolution from the perspective of general information types and information technologies. It shows that evolution is characterized by the fact that new types of information have developed in leaps and bounds with new storage technologies, new duplication technologies, and new processing technologies. Furthermore, it shows that each new information technology has led to increasingly well-targeted variation mechanisms that have exponentially accelerated evolution. But let us do everything step by step. Let's start with the basic concept of Darwinian theory. A selection system, usually a differential equation system, describes the dynamics of the frequencies of genotypes. A mutation mechanism leads to a new genotype and thus to a new phenotype with a new trait. This leads to a new selection system with changed parameters, and the Darwinian cycle starts all over again. In the first step of extension, we extend Darwinian terms. Instead of genetic information, we consider general information. For example, content of consciousness, cultural behavior, or constitutional laws. Instead of phenotypes, we consider forms. For example, agriculture or livestock breeding, or for example, democracy or dictatorship. Instead of mutation mechanisms for genetic information, we consider variation mechanisms for general information. For example, imitation, learning, teaching, logical reasoning. Instead of simple selection systems, we consider general evolution systems, for example, the prisoner's dilemma or the evolutionary systems resulting from the different cooperation mechanisms. This results in the Darwinian cycle for the extended terms, here marked in green. Selection system is replaced by evolution system, genetic information by general information, mutation mechanism by variation mechanism, and the term phenotype is replaced by the term form. If the Darwinian cycle has been run through many times, a qualitative leap in biological traits can occur. The general theory, in a second step, marked red here, assumes that the evolutionary leaps fundamental to evolution lead to the appearance of new information technologies. First, for each new type of information, a storage technology emerges, resulting in a qualitatively new evolutionary system. Subsequently, the Darwinian cycle is run again until there is another leap, which results in a new duplication technology. After further runs, a new processing technology, and finally, a new type of information occurs, and the process of the emergence of new technologies starts all over again. In a third essential step of extension, here marked in purple, one can show that each new information technology leads to a new variation mechanism, in particular, how I call it, to a targeted variation mechanism. The higher the information technology is developed, the more the new variation mechanisms are targeted. Examples of targeted variation mechanisms are imitation, learning, teaching, logical reasoning, utility optimization, investment, or especially genetic manipulation. Targeted variation mechanisms do not change information in a completely random way, but change information with information that has already proven to be advantageous in a previous evolutionary system. To some extent, they shorten evolutionary detours and avoid aberrations. Targeted variation mechanisms are therefore a major reason why evolution is progressing faster and faster. Now to another conclusion from the general theory. One of the important results is that the general theory leads to a natural chronology of evolution based on the emerging new information technologies. Overall, the entire evolution from the origin of life to the present day can be naturally divided into 8 ages, according to the 8 information types that emerge. These ages correspond to the following information types or storage technologies: crystal, RNA, DNA, nervous system, cerebrum, external local storage, the cloud as external dislocated network storage. And for the future, we can expect a type of information that will be enabled by the coming human-machine symbiosis. Each of these ages can typically be broken down into 3 sub-ages according to the emerging storage, duplication, and processing technologies. As an example, we zoom into the age 4, characterized by the information type complex consciousness contents in the cerebrum, which started about 6 million years ago and lasted until the invention of writing as a new type of information about 5,000 years ago. The biological trait of a high-quality associative neural network in the cerebrum makes a storage technology possible, which can store simple causal relationships. This corresponds to the age of the hominins, that is, the human life. The biological trait of simple language, which evolved about 900,000 years ago, is an efficient duplication technology for individual experience. This corresponds to the age of Homo. The biological traits that led to the cognitive revolution about 60,000 years ago enable, for example, logical reasoning as a processing technology of consciousness content. This corresponds to the age of Homo sapiens. In addition to the concept of targeted variations and natural chronology of evolution, however, many other new ideas are found in the general theory. For example, on the topics evolutionary information theory, megatrends of evolution, evolution of the driving forces, constraints, illusion of free will, win-win and cooperation mechanisms, utility optimization, and last but not least, artificial intelligence 2.0. Now let's come to the conclusion. Looking at the evolution from the perspective of information types and information technologies, the entire evolution from the origin of life to the market economy can be better understood in a natural way. More information can be found in a just published book and on my homepage. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I'm happy to answer all your questions by email. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Erhard. And I see you've got a question. I'm gonna ask Sam to unmute himself.
Yeah, hi. I mean, analogies are always slippery creatures. So sort of two parts to this question. The first is, this is a nice sort of verbal presentation, but can you formalize the model in a way that can make any kinds of specific predictions? And there is an alternative explanation for why things have been speeding up, and which is that simply the total population size is larger, and therefore there are more individuals providing ideas. That's not, unless I'm misunderstanding your theory, that is not part of the mechanism of what's going on here.
Well, I don't discuss the special biological mechanisms. What I discuss are the mathematical differential equations which evolve, and how one can describe all these terms more formally, and that is all. That all can you find in my book in very detail. But of course, the general theory, what the general theory can do is that on which planet you ever will be, evolution will take place in these 3 steps for every new information type: storage, duplication, processing. And from all that, it's clear that the evolution becomes faster and faster, and goes to more complex and complex systems.
Great. Thank you so much, Erhard. I appreciate your contribution today. All right, and we'll move on to our next speaker. Igor, since you're here, did you want to give a presentation or did you want me to play the video?
No, please come on video.
Play the video? Okay. So folks, just so you know, there was a pre-arrangement since Igor wasn't sure he'd have reliable internet service. So I'm going to share. 1 second. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. And I'll start that now.
Dear colleagues, in my presentation, I want to draw your attention to one tendency in biological evolution. The first question is whether evolution is directional or chaotic. Well, curves clearly represent the sphere changed drastically, but tendency remains the same. Mass extinctions follow one after another, wiping out up to 90% of all species, but more intelligent species come over and over. To find a plausible explanation, and I will stress materialistic explanation, of this tendency, we should return to the old idea which was entertained by many great thinkers in the past and contemporary thinkers as well. All the phenomena in the non-living world do not follow this accelerating growth. So we can come to a certain conclusion. And accelerating growth is a feature of living world only, with one exception. This exception is our human civilization and its development. If you look at the global picture of our technology changes, you would find same tendency. Several curves would stress and prove this tendency. Volume of information storage in the data centers worldwide. The volume of information we create and have to store follows the same tendency. And through our history, we had to develop new technology for storing and processing information, getting rid, which is similar to mass extinction, of all technologies through our history. All technological advances are the product of the mind. And this mind is collective mind of all humans. Here is rhetorical and provocative question. Does anybody think that these technological advances come from supernatural force? We know beyond all the doubts that all our technological advances are a product of human collective work. If you look at the table presenting the analogies between evolution and civilization development, we found them pretty remarkably close. They actually copy one another. Both are irreversible. Both are processing at uneven, accelerating pace. They progress intermittently, abruptly. They progress from less complex, less intelligent to more complex and more intelligent. And parts in our mechanisms and parts in our bodies are made of the same parts. All life forms, as well as all technological devices, are not perfect. And both accelerate with accumulation of global intelligence. Human race intelligence and same time biosphere global intelligence. Now, the idea I want to bring to your attention is this. The biosphere is a single global organism that possesses a mind, creativity, and will. The idea of the existence of the single organism on the Earth, which is the biosphere, which is my definition is a sum of all living matters, was to a certain extent expressed by thinkers in the past like Bernard de Chardin, Omega Point, our contemporaries, James Lovelock, with his Gaia concept, and Howard Bloom in this book of the global mind, and many others. You may argue whether biosphere as a single organism possesses any intelligence. How we can doubt this? You are the part and the essential part of the biosphere. Do you possess an intelligence? Therefore, biosphere is definitely in the possess of much greater intelligence as any one of us. Then the question which casts shadow doubt of this would be whether biosphere is a myriad of separate entities, or all these entities are connected through the network or global network of information, exchange, storage, and copying of information. Let me quote essential contemporary thinker Stuart Kaufman. In his book At Home in the Universe, he wrote, "The biosphere around us sustains us, is created by us. The patterns of life's births and burials are caused by internal processes. Life is not located in a property of any single molecule in the details, but is a collective property of system of interacting molecules. Life, in his view, emerged whole and has also always remained whole." Stuart later wrote, "A set of molecules either does or does not have the property that it is able to catalyze its own formation and reproduction from some simple food molecules. No vital force or extra substance is present in this emergent, self-replicating whole. But the collective system does possess a stunning property that not possessed by any of its parts. It is able to reproduce itself and evolve. Here is a key: quantity to quality transition. From the very beginning, our biosphere has been continuously and steadily multiplying its life forms. The number of prokaryote cells alone amount to approximately 10 to 30 degrees. To keep this vast household in order, a system of sophisticated tools is needed. These tools ensure the uninterrupted flow of information. Information and feedback flows are as vital for the biosphere as the bloodstream and nerve signals are for our bodies. In order to ensure its self-preservation and well-being, the biosphere is forced to develop new, advanced, more intelligent life forms. The biosphere, not species, supposed to be self-sufficient and selfish. The driving force behind the evolutionary process is not the pressure of natural selection, but the growth of the biosphere's overall intelligence. Now it is time to compare evolution, which cannot be directly investigated, with the development of our civilization. The latter is well documented and presents no enigma to us. Human civilization is natural phenomenon. It arose naturally with the increase of number of people and communication between them. The creator of civilization is known. It is us, the people, the components and active members of human society. In the same way, the biosphere is developing itself, forming a process called evolution through the action of its organisms, starting from the first day of the formation of self-replicating molecules. What can a single replicator do? Close to none. Same single transistor, which our computers consist of, can do nothing. But millions of transistors may form computers and supercomputers. Myriads of material replicators can form life if they communicate each other in non-material way. This is matter of quality and organization. And the non-material way, I mean the flows of information. As the number of replicators steadily grow, the biosphere is faced with new challenges. It has to handle and control a rapidly growing household. So the environment does not play a role in the evolution? Not exactly. If the condition of the planet allow and promote the multiplication of productive replicators, the biosphere will meet new challenges and respond to them by creating new, more intelligent and more complex species. If the condition for replications would be less favorable than it happens on our planet, multiplication could stop or even reverse. Then no challenges arise and no evolution is needed. The Earth's uniqueness and advantageous conditions, temperature, atmosphere, cosmic radiation, etc., promote endless replication of propagation. Evolution on our planet is inevitable. If such condition lasts for extended time, like many millions of years, some kind of intelligence will and should appear in life forms. The biosphere, as an assembly of all living forms, is a single organism that possesses a mind and will. All living worlds are connected by a global information network. Evolution is coordinated and controlled process. The main evolution vector is the growing computational complexity of the most advanced living organisms and the biosphere's overall intelligence. The increased complexity of living forms require more intellectually advanced organisms capable of storing and handling a growing amount of information. More intricate organisms require even greater biosphere intelligence in order to retain control over the whole living world. Controlled biological evolution is a continuous process characterized by intermittent and accelerated evolutionary dynamic. New species emerge when two conditions are met. This is called macroevolution. Global intelligence of the biosphere reached its capacity. And biosphere critical mass of intelligence acquires the capability to create more advanced creatures. This hypothesis I present today does not contradict any naturalistic concept of life creation and evolution. It is materialistic. It does not need supernatural forces. More information may be found in my books and articles. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you, George. Thanks for submitting your video and for being able to be here. In the interest of time, I think we're going to have to move on. I think you should be able to share your screen.
Hello, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, you're very quiet though.
Oh, is it better now? And can you see my screen as
Yes,
well?
it is.
Okay. Dear all, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. My name is Sherry, recently graduated from Nanjing Agricultural University. And in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to introduce you to my thoughts on the purpose of sexual selection with the new theory which incorporates allostasis, a relatively newly emerged concept in physiology and biomedicine, into explaining the aesthetical elements in matrix of sexual selection, a topic that has long been debated in the field of theoretical evolution. And my email address is shown here. So if you have any questions after the presentation, you are welcome to contact me with an email. And the talk is based on my paper at preprint, accessible at the following address. So as a background to the question, there is a 100-year-old paradox in evolution which has been passed down from the Darwinian time about sexual selection. Why do extravagant secondary traits emerge in the first place in sexual selection? Isn't it a direct contrast to the direction of natural selection, in which ecological adaptations and functional optimizations of the traits are favored? Why appearance matter in mate choice? It's no wonder that natural selection dominates the species in the wild, update their arsenal, behavioral or physiological, for better adaptations to the environment, for better chances of survival. Sexual selection brings forward the most prominent discrepancy to the trend of natural selection, as it comes to mate choice, which is supposedly the most important decision ever made in an organism's life history. The basis underlying mate choice, the standard applied in sexual selection, is not in line with the level of functional adaptation. For addressing this discrepancy between sexual selection and natural selection, I propose a new theory which incorporates allostatic concepts into explaining the sexual selection paradox. Allostasis is a newly emerged concept in physiology and biomedicine. Allostasis means stability through change, which could be elaborated into the maintenance of stability of the performance of the physiological system through the change of the physiological parameters. As allostasis occurs, it leads to allostatic load, which are basically the side effects from past allostasis. And there is a general rule that the more efficient or efficient the allostasis is, the less allostatic load would be accumulated over time on the system. And allostatic load is not a good thing. It's also called wear and tear, or physiological weatherings like somatic damage and the sensitization of receptors. Over time, if allostatic load is overwhelming, the organism will enter a status called allostatic overload, wherein the allostatic capacity of the organism means its chances adapting to the changes in its life in the future is severely squeezed, so that the organism is no longer able to adapt to new changes. Basically, I conceptualize that any phenotype is a composition of the underlying physiological pathways whose relative strengths vary across different individuals of the same species, and the organism encounters changes either internal or external, either hormonal or environmental changes could be perceived by the organism and then centrally regulated by the modulation of the mediators. And at the downstream, it triggers cascades of physiological pathways, which leads to the adaptation or the realization of the plasticity of the phenotype. And then for the sake of adapting the organism to the new change, after the rounds of physiological pathways, the change can be successfully addressed, and then as a negative feedback, the mediators were brought back down to its normal levels. So the whole process of allostasis occurs in a way that firstly the stimulus is perceived, and then it could be encountering a predator in the wild, or either just experiencing the change of seasons. For example, at the onset of the breeding season, there could be a rise in the testosterone on the males for better adapting them to the needs of the reproductive season. And these changes these adaptations are modulated by the changing level of physiological parameters. And then the new phenotype is brought out, and this is accompanied with behavioral and physiological updates. And the new phenotype leads to better adaptation. So how can allostatic laws be connected with sexual selection? And it turns out that even though the sense stimulus input is given to different individuals of the same species, the different individuals react and turn out into different phenotypes. For example, here, 4 individuals of the same species react to the same stimulus, and the first 2 phenotypes fail to be adaptive, and the later 2 phenotypes succeed in adapting to the change. However, there could be mild differentiation between the 2 phenotypes. The phenotype 3 maybe had a better strategy than phenotype 4 in terms of adapting to the environment, to the change, and it could turn out to have a strategy which allows less stress and a more relaxed mental feeling, and the other phenotype has experienced more stress in the process, even though the non-adaptive phenotype over time were phased out by natural selection. However, those individuals successfully adapted to the change survive, but with varying post-hook costs, which are measured in allostatic loads. And the level of allostatic loads that they bear with them in the longer time period leads to clues to how sexual selection would occurs on these individuals. And so the story says some of these individuals in the population survived and successfully adapt to the change, but they are left with varying physiological bearings on them, with the more efficient strategy of adapting less allostatic load on them. So the natural selection process dominates which individuals cannot survive the change, and it comes down to the sexual selection to determine which of these individuals would have implicated reproductive success. As mentioned previously, there could be varying efficacy in the past allostasis in adapting to the change, and those with the high efficacy of allostasis has accordingly less allostatic loads on them. And as a consequence, they also have a higher remaining allostatic capacity, which means they have more physiological resources for allowing them to adapt into of the changes in the future, and meanwhile have a good track of self-maintenance, like a temperature regulation. Then how can allostasis, how can different remaining allostatic capacity leads to differential expression of the sexual attractiveness on different individual? It naturally follows from the hypothesis that the computation of the attractive of secondary traits for courtship is a risk in which the organism with a high reservation of allostatic capacity wins. So the key to be successful in sexual selection is not just to survive the challenge, but to survive it with a laudable margin. And there are multiple lines of evidence that had already been documented in the literature. For example, the pigmentations, which are like carotenoids, which are behind the coloration of those extravagant coloration of birds and fishes, are often metabolically expensive. And there has been study documents that the red plumage in finches, the sunbirds, have leads to have a higher liver aerobatic ability for it to be generated. And also there's another evidence from the mortal courtship, which often involves wing beating and leg waving repeatedly. And in the repeat action of this courtship, it tests out the level of energy reservation and the capability of energy mobilization, which are encompassed by the definition of allostasis. And also the sexually attractive partners, meanwhile, are also more immunocompetent. And by the definition of allostasis, immune functions are also charged by allostasis as it's triggered for adapting to the change. Also, developmental stress could lead to experienced during its young, could lead to detrimental effects in the organism's courtship behavior in its later life. And it could be explained in such a way that developmental stress during the young period could have a mark on the epitome for how it deals with stress in their future life. It leads to them to have a larger stress response usually, which translates to higher allostatic loads, which further affects their courtship behavior. And what I try to search out the purpose of sexual selection with the allostatic hypothesis. So natural selection is basically the trend of natural selection points out to survival of the individual. And for the species, it ensures its ecological expansion across space and time. However, sexual selection have a complementary thing, as it ensures that the species continues not just with a lot of stress and a survival mode, but with a refreshed vitality and well-being. So the basic sense of sexual selection is not expansion, but a process of iterate ego spinning, in which the organism could happily live in its realm of ego, in which its natural mode of behavior could be experienced, and it don't have to be on the line all the time and be always alerted by the restraint imposed by survival pressure.
Yeah, you were coming up to the end of your time. Could you just wrap up?
Yeah, so that's it.
Okay, perfect. Good timing. Thank you very
Yeah,
much
thank
for
you
your talk.
for being